Pretend you're with me, and I promise, your sister will regret every word she's uttered tonight. These words, from a complete stranger, transformed the most humiliating evening of my life into a moment of rare revenge I hadn't even dared to dream of. If you've ever been shamed by your family for being unmarried, hit like and subscribe if you believe karma finds the most unexpected and intricate paths, because this story proves the best revenge is jealousy impossible to hide behind a fake smile. But before we continue, tell us what city you're from. It's important for us to know how far our stories reach. The hall of the Golden Valley Country Restaurant was bathed in golden light, sparkling with crystal chandeliers the size of car wheels, and shimmering with 1,000 reflections from mirrored decorative elements. It was a true fairy tale, expensive, luxurious, meticulously designed down to the smallest detail. Pristine white orchids in tall vases, ivory silk draperies, live music from a string quartet. A dream wedding. A wedding featured in glossy magazines. But for me, this magical evening turned into a personal hell the second I saw my table number, written in calligraphic script on an elegant card, 12. The very last table in the room, tucked away in a corner next to the noisy, swinging kitchen doors, from which waiters rushed out every 30 seconds with heavy trays, bumping my chair and apologizing on the fly. The smell of fried meat, the clatter of dishes, the shouts of chefs, all of this was my company for the evening. My name is Anna, I'm 32, and for the past 8 years, I've worked as a marketing specialist for one of London's largest tech companies. My life is busy, dynamic, full of interesting projects, international business trips, and professional achievements I'm proud of. I own my apartment, bought with my own money. I have hobbies. I love hiking in the mountains, have already conquered several peaks in the Scottish Highlands, and dream of the Alps. I have friends, interests, plans for the future. But for my younger sister, Chloe, none of this mattered. To her, I was and remained just a family disappointment, a living reproach, a constant reminder that my biological clock was ticking, and my personal life just wasn't falling into place. In her worldview, a woman without a man is incomplete, a pathetic half desperately searching for her other part. Chloe and I were never close. There's only a 4-year age difference, but the chasm between us was Grand Canyon-sized. She was always the baby, Mum's favorite, a girl with a doll-like appearance and a manipulative personality. I, on the other hand, was serious, responsible, the one who could always be relied upon, essentially, convenient and boring. But after she got engaged a year and a half ago to Alex, a successful investment banker from a very wealthy London family who owned a chain of restaurants and several properties in the city centre, our cold rivalry turned into a full-blown war. A one-sided war, because for a long time I didn't even realize I was fighting. Chloe was already celebrating her victories, trampling on my dignity at every opportunity. "Oh, Annie, maybe you should try those dating apps again," she'd ask with such feigned concern at family dinners at our parents' house that I'd want to tip a plate of hot stew over her. But you know, everyone's on them now, even serious men. You just need to create the right profile. Want me to help you? I can tell you which photos to choose, what to write about yourself. The main thing is not to be too picky, Annie, she'd add, sipping wine and glancing at her engagement ring with a diamond the size of a finger joint. Time is passing, and you keep choosing and choosing. There are no perfect men. You need to be realistic. Mum usually nodded in agreement with Chloe's words, pursing her lips and shooting me reproachful glances, as if I truly were some incorrigible snob, too proud, rejecting hordes of worthy suitors left and right. Although, in reality, the number of worthy candidates in my life was precisely 0. There were dates that went nowhere. There were short romances that ended in mutual disappointment. But no one who truly touched my heart, no one who made my heart beat faster. Dad usually tried to lighten the mood with an awkward joke about the weather, football, or politics, any neutral topic, just to shift attention. But Chloe wouldn't let up. She seemed to derive some perverse pleasure from every failed date of mine, from every mention of me spending another weekend alone, from every hint of my unsettled life. My loneliness seemed to add an extra sparkle to her own happiness, making her victory even more significant. Early on the morning of her wedding day, she called me with another piece of good advice that was meant to finally shatter what little self-esteem I had left. "Annie, darling, I understand today might be emotionally difficult for you," Chloe said in that special voice typically reserved for the gravely ill or small children who can't grasp complex matters. "After all, there will be so many happy couples, people in love, romance. Just try not to look too miserable and lonely in the photos, okay? The photographer is very expensive, and I wouldn't want a sad face in the shots. And also, please, try not to spend the entire evening at the bar with a glass of wine, like at our cousin Sarah's wedding. Remember how everyone whispered afterward? I was so embarrassed. I should have heard the alarm bells in those words." This wasn't concern, it was a warning of the storm that would break over me that evening. But I still hoped my own sister wasn't cruel enough to turn her wedding into a public humiliation of her elder sister. God, how wrong I was. When I arrived at the Golden Valley in my modest white car, parking between enormous SUVs and executive sedans, I was wearing my best navy blue dress made of exquisite silk. I had spent 3 weeks choosing it, visited half the shopping centers in London, and spent half a month's salary, but the result was worth it. The dress fit perfectly, accentuating my figure while remaining elegant and understated. I had professional makeup done and styled my hair in soft curls. I looked good, even great, and that gave me a little confidence. But that confidence evaporated the second Chloe's best friend and bridesmaid, Olivia, her loyal ally in all intrigues and manipulations, approached me. With a thick folder of seating arrangements in her hands and a strained smile that didn't reach her eyes, she spoke in that sickly sweet voice typically used to deliver unpleasant news, attempting to sugarcoat it. "Oh, Annie, darling, how lovely to see you. You look absolutely wonderful. Come on, I'll show you to your table." Chloe was very meticulous about the seating plan to ensure everyone was comfortable. And there it was, table 12. The table for losers, for those invited out of politeness but not really expected. At this table sat 3 unmarried colleagues of Chloe's, around 25 to 27, who barely nodded at my arrival and immediately returned to their animated discussion of romantic dramas and boyfriend problems. Also there was our elderly Aunt Betty, Mum's sister, a woman in her 70s with a perpetually discontented face, who immediately began complaining about the music being too loud, the salad being served cold, and modern youth, who were completely undisciplined and didn't understand the value of family. "You know, Annie, in our day, girls by 30 were already raising 3 children and had respectable husbands," Aunt Betty said, critically surveying me over her thick lensed glasses. "And you're still working?" "Just working. Career, of course, is good, but a woman's happiness lies elsewhere, my dear. You should lower your standards, stop being so picky, or you'll miss out entirely. Then it'll be too late, the clock is ticking, you know." I nodded, clutching my champagne glass so tightly that my knuckles turned white, seriously fearing the fragile glass would crack in my hand. But the worst, the most humiliating, was yet to come. The real nightmare began about an hour later, when the celebration was in full swing. Guests had relaxed after the first toasts and glasses of champagne, and Chloe decided to make me a living example of how not to live your life. She appeared next to my table in her dazzling designer wedding dress, a dress that cost as much as a new car. I knew this for a fact because Chloe never missed an opportunity to mention the price. She grabbed my arm with unexpected force and practically dragged me across the entire hall to a group of Alex's relatives, people who exuded money, status, and power from every pore. These were the kind of people for whom a holiday in the Maldives was commonplace, for whom a £100,000 car was a workhorse, and a watch costing a 1-bedroom flat was just an accessory. "Everyone, meet my older sister, Anna," Chloe announced in a voice that was too loud, too demonstrative, drawing attention from nearby tables. She hugged Alex's shoulder, pressing against him as if marking territory, asserting ownership. "Our family career woman. She just works and works, such a workaholic. Absolutely no time left for a personal life, can you imagine? still hasn't found her special someone. But we're all hoping for her, aren't we, Annie? In her voice was such feigned concern mixed with ill-concealed schadenfreude that I felt a shiver of humiliation run down my spine. Alex's relatives smiled politely, but with obvious pity. Elizabeth, Alex's aunt, a stout woman in her 60s in a designer suit and massive gold jewelry, looked me up and down with that same sympathetic gaze usually reserved for homeless animals in a shelter or people with visible physical disabilities. "My dear girl, don't you worry so much," she drawled, shaking her head and clucking her tongue. "Everyone has their own destiny, their own time. Perhaps you should go to church more often, pray, light candles." My nephew Ben, he also didn't marry for a long time, always buried in work, and then he went to church, met a very devout girl there. They got married. They divorced 2 years later, true. Incompatible personalities, but that's another story. The main thing is to try. Chloe laughed, and this laugh had nothing to do with good-natured amusement. It was the laugh of triumph, the laugh of someone enjoying another's humiliation. "Anna is a very independent woman, isn't she, sissy?" she said, and the word independent sounded like a diagnosis of a severe, incurable disease. "She has such high standards, such demands on men, just an unattainable ideal in her head. I tell her, Annie, come back to earth. Reality isn't a fairy tale." "I just haven't met the right person yet," I said, using my last ounce of strength, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity and not burst into tears right here, in front of all these strangers who were so confident in their superiority. "But you can't wait for Prince Charming forever, darling," interjected Susan, Alex's mother, an elegant woman with cold eyes and an impeccable hairstyle. She adjusted her designer handbag, which probably cost as much as my monthly salary. "My eldest daughter did exactly that. She chose and chose, waited for the ideal, and as a result, she only got married at 43. And now she can't have children due to medical reasons. Her reproductive age is past. A very sad story. Don't repeat her mistakes, my dear, don't waste time." I felt everything inside me clench with shame and anger. Shame at standing there like I was on trial, an object of universal pity. Anger at Chloe, who orchestrated this spectacle. Anger at myself for letting myself be drawn into it. But the next hour was even worse. It was a veritable parade of unsolicited advice from people I was meeting for the first time in my life, who for some reason felt entitled to tell me how to live. Mark, Alex's business partner, a man in his 50s with a formidable belly and a massive gold watch, remarked importantly as he approached us with a glass of brandy. "You know, Anna, I'll tell you, as an experienced man, you need to lower your expectations and be realistic. Modern women want too much from men. They want a prince, but honestly, they're not princesses themselves. Find a normal guy with a decent salary and no bad habits, and that's already good." Andrew, a family friend of the groom, a talkative man who had clearly had too much to drink, enthusiastically shared an inspiring story. "My aunt, she got married for the first time at 50 to a widower with 6 children. And it's fine, they live, they manage. The children didn't accept her at first, of course, boycotted her, but those are minor things. At least she's not alone. See, it's never too late." Even the photographer, a young guy with a trendy haircut and a professional camera, managed to insert his comments. When it was time for family group photos, he repeatedly asked if I had a +1, who I came with, where my partner was. And each time I said, "I'm alone," he'd raise his eyebrows in surprise and drawl, "Seriously? Such a beautiful girl, and alone at a wedding? That's kind of sad. You need to change something in your life, darling." I stood there, smiling, nodding, saying something polite and vague, but inside, a storm of humiliation and helpless anger was building. Every comment was like a blow, every piece of advice like a spit in the face. But the true, absolute culmination of this nightmare occurred during the traditional tossing of the bride's bouquet. "Attention, attention, all single ladies to the dance floor," bellowed the host, Liam, a DJ with a flamboyant smile and a radio presenter's voice. And in his intonation, I distinctly heard a mocking, taunting note, as if he were saying, "Let's look at these losers who still haven't managed to get married." I tried to blend into the crowd, to hide behind one of the decorative columns, pretending to tie my shoelace and completely ignore the call. But Olivia, Chloe's loyal bridesmaid, noticed my attempt at escape. She walked across the entire hall, grabbed my arm with unexpected force, and dragged me onto the dance floor. "Annie, what are you doing? Come on, come on. Maybe you'll get lucky and catch the bouquet." "It's good luck, you know," she chirped with that fake cheerfulness that made me want to either run away or punch her in the face. I found myself in a tight circle of laughing, excited girls. Most of them were Alex's young cousins and friends, fresh out of university, full of hopes, illusions, and a firm conviction that their love lives would turn out much better than this poor 32-year-old spinster's. Among these radiant young girls, I felt like a dinosaur at a children's party, an anachronistic exhibit. Chloe stood with her back to us, holding a magnificent bouquet of pristine white roses, delicate violets, and sprigs of gypsophila, tied with satin ribbons. I watched as she slowly turned, found me with her gaze in the crowd of girls, and a smirk appeared on her lips, a triumphant, malicious smirk. And then, intentionally and demonstratively, she threw the bouquet in the completely opposite direction, as far from me as she possibly could. The bouquet flew in a high arc and landed directly in the hands of Emily, Alex's 24-year-old cousin, a pretty blonde who shrieked with delight so piercingly that my ears rang. The crowd of guests erupted in applause, whistles, and joyful shouts. Everyone laughed, congratulated Emily, and predicted her imminent wedding. And Chloe, hugging the happy girl's shoulders, turned to me and loudly announced to the entire hall with feigned sympathy, "Oh, what a shame. It looks like my sister Annie will have to wait a little longer. But no worries, darling. Your time will definitely come. The main thing is not to lose hope and faith in yourself." The hall laughed again, and this laughter cut me like 1,000 shards of broken glass. I saw people's faces. Some looked with genuine pity, some with relief that this wasn't their shame or their humiliation, some simply indifferently, as if it were just another wedding entertainment. I stood there, in the center of the dance floor, under the gaze of dozens of eyes, and felt something inside me break, crumble, turn to dust. This wasn't just hurt. It was a deep, deafening humiliation, the realization that my own sister had deliberately, thoughtfully turned her wedding into a public execution of my dignity. I returned to my accursed table 12 on shaky legs, fighting back the tears that burned my eyes. Chloe's colleagues didn't even lift their heads, continuing their endless chatter. Aunt Betty shook her head and said, "Well, you see, Annie, even fate is giving you a sign. You need to change something, my dear, before it's completely too late." This evening was supposed to be a celebration of love, joy, and family unity. Instead, Chloe had turned it into a public spectacle, where I was the main loser, an object of pity and ridicule. I was seriously considering just getting up and leaving. Slipping unnoticed to the exit, getting in my car, and driving away, while everyone else was having fun and dancing, and no one would notice the absence of the bride's pathetic, lonely sister. Let Chloe triumph in her victory without me. But before I gathered the courage to give Chloe that final satisfaction to see me give up and flee the battlefield, a low, deep, surprisingly calm male voice sounded behind me. "Pretend you're with me." I spun around sharply and saw a man who looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a business magazine. Tall, about 6 feet 3 inches, with an athletic build that even his perfectly tailored dark gray suit couldn't entirely conceal. Dark hair with a touch of gray at the temples, which lent him an air of gravitas. A strong jawline, and eyes warm, brown, attentive, with glints of something akin to sympathy and determination. "Excuse me?" I gasped, disbelieving my ears and thinking I'd misheard him. "Your sister has been standing by the bar for about 10 to 15 minutes, he said, nodding in the direction where Chloe's pristine white figure was indeed visible, telling my colleague Amark how sincerely worried she is about you because you can't find a man and sort out your personal life. She pities you deeply, it's quite touching." I don't think you gave her permission to share the details of your private life with strangers at her own wedding. He spoke calmly, almost casually, but there was irony in his voice and an understanding of the situation. I followed his gaze and indeed saw Chloe, gesturing animatedly in my direction, leaning into the ear of the very same Mark who had given me advice about lowering my standards. Her face expressed exaggerated concern, and her gestures were full of theatrical drama. "Do you mind if I sit next to you and pretend we're together?" the stranger asked. But in his voice, it was clear the decision had already been made, and he was simply offering a favor that would be rude to refuse. I silently shook my head, unable to utter a word. My throat tightened with a knot of emotions: relief, gratitude, disbelief. For the first time in this entire nightmarish, humiliating evening, I felt invisible, not an object of pity, not a family disgrace, but just a person. A living person whom someone had noticed and decided to protect. "Ben," he introduced himself, extending his hand for a handshake. His grip was warm, firm, confident. "Alex's cousin. Originally from London, but I've been living and working in Prague for the last 5 years. Came for my cousin's wedding and seemed to have stumbled upon a rather interesting family show. And you, if I understood correctly from all the conversations going on, are the bride's older sister who desperately needs saving from the terrible curse of eternal loneliness." There was a slight irony in his voice, but without malice, more with sympathy. I involuntarily laughed. For the first time all evening, it was a genuine, sincere laugh, not a strained smile of politeness. "Yes, that's me, Anna. The family charity project. The object of universal pity and unsolicited advice." "Well, as of this moment, no more," he said with that disarming, mischievous smile that created crinkles at the corners of his eyes. He pulled a chair closer, sat beside me, placed a hand on the back of my chair, and leaned in slightly, just enough so that from a distance, it looked like we were a couple who had known each other well for a long time, a couple with history and intimacy. The effect was instantaneous and stunning. I almost physically felt a wave of attention ripple through the room. First, a few people at a neighboring table turned their heads our way, exchanged glances, and began whispering something. Then others noticed. And the whispers spread like ripples in water, quickly, irresistibly, encompassing more and more guests. Chloe, who was still by the bar discussing something with the event planner, apparently felt the shift in atmosphere. She sharply turned her head in my direction, and I watched her face change from carefree to surprised, from surprised to disbelieving. Her flawless wedding smile froze for a moment, trembled, and twisted. And then she rapidly headed towards our table, her pristine white train gliding behind her across the floor like the tail of an enraged comet. "Anna," she exclaimed, her voice half a tone higher than usual, with poorly concealed notes of panicked surprise. "I had no idea you knew Ben. You never once mentioned him to me. How long have you known each other? Where from?" Questions tumbled out one after another, fast, insistent, demanding. "Old friends," Ben replied calmly, and his hand lightly, naturally, touched mine, resting on the table. As if he had done it 1,000 times, as if it were a familiar gesture of intimacy. "We just haven't seen each other in ages, lost touch for a while. You know how it is. Life, work, distance." Chloe narrowed her eyes. I could see her mind working frantically, trying to find logic, to reconstruct the scene, to understand what was happening. Her perfectly drawn eyebrows subtly rose in bewilderment. "It's really very strange," she drawled, trying to maintain control of the situation. "Anna never, ever mentioned you. Not even a hint. And we're sisters, after all, we share everything." "I prefer to keep my private life to myself," I replied, and suddenly felt something forgotten awaken within me: confidence, self-respect, the right to personal boundaries. "You know how particular I am about work-life balance, Chloe. I don't like to air everything out in public." The jab was subtle, but Chloe felt it. Her smile became even more strained. The situation was almost comical. All evening, Chloe had methodically paraded my loneliness, my supposedly pathetic existence without a man, and now she stood before me, burning with curiosity and trying to extract details about a relationship that had appeared out of nowhere and ruined her entire carefully orchestrated spectacle of humiliation. "How wonderful," she finally squeezed out, her voice laced with ill-concealed notes of envy and irritation. "And how long have you two been back in touch? When did you meet again? Is it serious?" "Long enough to understand each other," Ben replied calmly, with that mysterious half-smile that was clearly driving Chloe mad because it gave no concrete information but hinted at much. Chloe stood for a few more seconds, clearly hoping to extract something else. But Ben calmly turned to me and began to tell me something about his last trip to the Alps, completely ignoring her presence. Chloe was forced to leave, and I watched her head straight for Olivia, grab her friend by the elbow, and begin nervously, rapidly whispering something in her ear, constantly shooting bewildered, irritated glances our way. When she was finally far enough away, Ben leaned in and quietly whispered right into my ear, "She looks like she just bit into a whole lemon, peel and all." I couldn't help but laugh, a genuine, deep, liberating laugh that started somewhere in my stomach and burst forth, washing away all the shame and humiliation of the past few hours. "She's just not used to me being outside her control," I confessed. "To her, I've always been predictable, convenient. The responsible older sister she could label however she wanted. And suddenly, boom, I'm off script." "All the better," Ben said seriously, looking into my eyes. "Let her guess, let her stew, let her lose sleep trying to figure out what's happening. It'll be fair after the show she put on." For the next hour, Ben played his role flawlessly, like an Oscar-worthy actor. He brought me drinks, not just going to the bar but specifically asking what I wanted: champagne, wine, water, juice. He made clever, subtle jokes that made me laugh genuinely. He listened to me with such attention, such sincere interest, a quality I hadn't encountered in men for a long time, not polite indifference where someone waits for you to finish to say something of their own, but genuine curiosity. And from time to time, he lightly touched my hand, my shoulder, light, fleeting touches, but noticeable enough from a distance to make everything look convincing to outsiders. To leave no doubt, these two were together. But it wasn't just about playing to the audience. He was genuinely interested in me as a person. He asked for details about my work, not just generic "what do you do," but specifics: what projects, what tasks, what I liked, what annoyed me. He asked about my hiking hobby, what routes I'd taken, which peak was the most challenging, what my future plans were. He was interested in my recent trip to the Czech Republic, what I saw, where I walked, my impressions, which cafes I had coffee in. "You're not at all what I expected, listening to all those conversations about you today," he said between songs, when the music briefly quieted and we could speak in normal voices without shouting over the speakers. "And what did you expect to see? Judging by your sister's and her circle's descriptions, I expected to meet someone pathetic, desperate, insecure," he answered directly, without diplomatic evasion. "A woman with dull eyes who had already given up and resigned herself to the role of eternal loser. Instead, I see an intelligent, interesting, funny, and very, very beautiful woman. And frankly, I completely fail to understand why you're alone. It just doesn't make sense." "Because I have standards," I said, without thinking, and immediately feared it sounded arrogant or snobbish. But Ben simply laughed. Warmly, sincerely, without a hint of judgment. "And rightly so. Good for you," he said simply. And in those words was so much support that I felt something warm and forgotten begin to thaw inside me. By this point, Chloe was no longer hiding her paranoid obsession with watching us. She whispered with Olivia, then with other bridesmaids, who kept turning our way, trying to get a better look, to understand what was happening. Alex's relatives, who an hour ago had condescendingly advised me to lower my standards and be realistic, now looked at Ben with clear respect and even a certain reverence, recognizing him as a man of their own circle, successful, wealthy, and from the right family, and completely failed to understand how such a loser and old maid like me had managed to meet such a man, and apparently, to interest him. The revenge turned out to be even sweeter than I could have dreamed in my wildest fantasies. But Ben clearly wasn't finished yet. When the orchestra began to play a slow, romantic melody, something old, a little forgotten, like a waltz, Ben rose from his seat and extended his hand to me with a slight, confident smile. "Shall we dance?" he said. And it wasn't a question, it was an invitation that was impossible and undesirable to refuse. On the dance floor, when his hand rested confidently on my waist and mine on his shoulder, I suddenly felt, acutely and physically, the gazes of all those people who had so recently offered me unsolicited advice about finding a man, lowering my standards, and being realistic in my expectations. I saw their faces out of the corner of my eye, surprise, curiosity, envy, a reassessment of their opinions. But the strangest thing was, I no longer felt hurt or humiliated. Next to Ben, it was surprisingly calm and safe. He moved easily, with the natural grace of a man who truly knows how to dance, not just shuffle his feet. And holding his hand, feeling the warmth of his palm on my waist, was pleasant. So pleasant that I almost forgot it was all a game, a theater, a performance for the public. "Your sister is looking at us as if she's trying to kill us with her mind," he whispered in my ear, and I felt goosebumps run down my spine from his closeness, from the warmth of his breath. "I know," I replied softly. "I saw. She looks like she's about to explode with curiosity and anger." "Excellent, mission accomplished," he chuckled, and those mischievous sparks that made his face younger and incredibly attractive glinted in his eyes. I looked up and met his gaze, brown, warm, with golden flecks deep within, and felt my heart skip a beat. This man, a complete stranger 2 hours ago, had in one evening restored my sense of self-worth, which Chloe had so diligently trampled all day. Almost restored, perhaps even completely. At that moment, Chloe approached us, Alex in tow. Her smile was so strained and artificial that it seemed painted with a marker on a porcelain doll. "Guys, I'm so sorry to interrupt your dance," she began, her voice trembling with poorly suppressed emotions. "Do you mind if I borrow Ben for a moment? Alex wants to introduce him to Uncle Robertan. Important business discussion." "Actually, yes, I do mind," Ben replied politely but absolutely firmly, not stopping the dance or even slowing his movement. "Anna and I are rather busy here. Business can wait." A whole storm of conflicting emotions, surprise that he dared to refuse her at her own wedding, hurt, anger, bewilderment flashed across Chloe's face before she forced out a strained, of course, I understand. "I just wanted to say how genuinely happy I am that Anna has finally found someone. We were all so worried about her, weren't we, Alex?" The whole family was concerned. Alex awkwardly nodded beside her, clearly sensing the tension and regretting being dragged into this family drama. "Really?" Ben asked calmly, almost indifferently, and his gaze turned cold, like the ice of a winter lake. "That's very strange to hear, because all evening I've observed quite the opposite. I saw how much more occupied you were with publicly portraying Anna as a lonely failure and an object of universal pity than with supporting your own sister. A rather peculiar way of showing care and concern, don't you think?" His directness, his absolute honesty, literally stunned Chloe. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, but found nothing to say. Alex awkwardly shuffled beside her, sensing the situation spiraling out of control but not daring to intervene in a family conflict he wasn't directly involved in. We just want Anna to be happy," Chloe finally stammered. And for the first time all evening, her voice held notes of uncertainty and almost childlike bewilderment. "Then perhaps you should treat her with respect and dignity, instead of turning her personal life into an entertainment show for guests," Ben replied calmly, but with a firm and uncompromising tone. I had never in my life seen Chloe look so flustered and bewildered. Her usual confidence, her control over the situation, her ability to manipulate and manage all of it crumbled in an instant, like a house of cards in a gentle breeze. "I don't know what exactly Anna told you, but," she began, trying to seize the initiative and turn the situation in her favor. "I don't need her to tell me anything," Ben calmly interrupted her. "I have eyes, ears, and a brain. I can perfectly well see what's going on here myself. Alex finally decided to intervene, clearly trying to diffuse the tense atmosphere and salvage what was left of the festive mood. Chloe, darling, maybe we should really let them dance in peace? We still have so much to do. The host is calling for a game. They walked away, and Chloe immediately began nervously, rapidly whispering with Olivia, repeatedly shooting us glances full of a mix of anger, bewilderment, and something akin to resentment. You know, that was incredibly nice, I quietly confessed to Ben, my voice betraying a tremor from the rising emotions. Thank you. Seriously, no one has ever stood up for me so openly. We're not finished yet, Ben said with that same disarming smile that made me catch my breath and my heart beat faster. Until the very end of the evening, Ben did not leave my side for a second, and it turned into a genuine spectacle that overshadowed even the wedding itself. When the main course of dinner was served exquisite steaks with sides and sauce, she calmly called over the restaurant manager and asked to be moved to another table, citing certain dietary restrictions related to kitchen smells that triggered his migraines. The staff, obviously knowing who Ben was and what family he came from, instantly and without further questions complied with the request. Literally 5 minutes later, our table, that very infamous table 12 for losers, was moved almost to the very center of the hall, right in front of the stage, to the most prominent spot, where the spotlights shone and from where there was the best view of everything happening. The effect was stunning. Chloe's friends and colleagues, who just 3 hours ago had diligently ignored my existence, now approached our table themselves, attempting to make polite conversation, asking where and when Ben and I had met, how long we'd been seeing each other, if everything between us was serious. Alex's relatives, who had looked down on me and showered me with unsolicited advice, now displayed genuine, almost fawning curiosity, trying to ingratiate themselves. Even Elizabeth, the very aunt who had advised me to go to church and pray for a husband, now beamed with a completely different attitude. When she learned, and Olivia, of course, couldn't resist spreading the information throughout the hall, that Ben was a successful tech entrepreneur, a graduate of a prestigious university, developing his business in Prague, and owning shares in several European startups, her tone instantly, magically, changed 180 degrees. Well, I never, Annie, you dark horse, she exclaimed, joining us with a glass of champagne and a radiant smile. Why did you keep quiet before, hid that you had such a respectable, promising young man? We would have. Well, we would have known. Ben, darling, have you considered returning to London? There are such prospects here, such opportunities now. I sat, smiled, and observed this spectacle of hypocrisy with a strange feeling. On one hand, it was pleasant to see how attitudes changed, how people who an hour ago pitied me now envied me. On the other, it was bitter to realize that my value in the eyes of these people had increased, not because I had changed or they had gotten to know me better, but simply because I was next to the right man with the right status and the right bank account. But the true, absolute triumph, the culmination of the entire evening, occurred during the traditional ceremony of tossing the bride's garter. When Alex, already quite tipsy and cheerful, was preparing to throw the garter to the single men gathered on the dance floor with jokes, taunts, and drunken shouts, Ben calmly, without fuss, rose from his seat and walked to the center, confident and relaxed, as if it were his own celebration, not his cousin's wedding. Ben, wait, aren't you not single? Chloe cried out, and a genuine, undisguised panic was in her voice. You're with Anna. This is for single men. He turned, looked first at me, then at Chloe, and that same slight, disarming half-smile appeared on his lips. Technically, I'm still single, Chloe. Anna and I are just not rushing into formalities, getting to know each other again, taking our time, enjoying the process. The garter, as if obeying some higher, ironic justice of fate, described an arc in the air and fell directly into Ben's hands. I don't know if Alex accidentally aimed it there or if it was truly pure chance, a trick of fate, but the effect surpassed all my wildest expectations and fantasies. According to old wedding tradition, the man who catches the garter must place it on the leg of the girl who caught the bride's bouquet. But Emily, Alex's 24-year-old cousin, had long since gone outside to smoke and chat with her friends, completely forgetting about all these traditions and rituals. "Oh, it seems we have a problem. The girl with the bouquet has disappeared," announced the host, Liam, with feigned disappointment. "We urgently need a volunteer. Who wants to try on the lucky garter?" All eyes, absolutely every single gaze in the room, turned to me. Ben looked at me with a silent question in his eyes, and I, feeling my heart pound wildly, deafeningly somewhere in my throat, slowly nodded. To an explosion of applause, whistles, cheers, and joyful shouts from the guests, I stood up and walked to the center of the dance floor. I sat on the chair that had been prepared, and Ben knelt before me, slowly, beautifully, like in a movie, and gently, almost reverently, took my leg in his hands. When his fingers touched my skin, slowly, carefully putting on the lace garter, a powerful electric current seemed to pass between us. I looked up and met his eyes, and in that moment, I understood with absolute, crystal clarity, this was no longer a game. Perhaps it had never been a game. In his gaze, there was something deep, serious, that made my heart stop, and then beat with double force. It was the gaze of a man who sees before him a woman, real, alive, and interesting to him. Chloe stood aside by the wall, pale, with a smile stretched to its limit, clutching a glass of champagne so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She watched as her pathetic, lonely sister transformed into the center of attention, into the heroine of a romantic story. When the celebration came to an end, Ben walked me to my car. In the car park, away from curious glances, I could finally exhale all the tension of that incredible evening. "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling. "I know it was all a game, but you saved me from the most humiliating evening of my life." "Why are you so sure it was a game?" he asked seriously, stopping and turning to face me. "Because you barely know me," I replied. "I know enough," he said, taking a step closer. "I know you're kind, even when people around you don't deserve it. That you had the strength to stand firm amidst all the mockery and not break. That you are beautiful inside and out, and that your sister is simply foolish if she doesn't understand what a treasure you are to your family." I felt tears well up in my eyes, but these were completely different tears, not tears of humiliation and pain. "Anna," Ben said softly. "I understand it all started as a rescue operation, but between our first dance and this moment, it stopped being a game for me. Completely stopped." He took out a business card and wrote his personal number on the back. "If you want to see me again, not for revenge, not for proof, but simply because you want to, call any time." I took the card with trembling fingers. "What if I want to call you tonight?" I asked. He replied with the same confident smile, "Then I'll pick up after the first ring." I called him 2 hours after returning home. We talked until 4:30 in the morning about work, about Prague, about dreams of opening my own marketing agency, about hiking in the mountains, and about why good coffee in the mornings is so important. 3 days later, we had our first real date at a small Italian restaurant in central London. We sat at a corner table, drank wine, ate the best carbonara, and talked, and talked, and talked. 3 months later, we were officially dating. He flew to London every 2 weeks, and I went to Prague twice to see him. 6 months later, I moved in with him. My company agreed to remote work, and then I took the plunge and opened the marketing agency I had dreamed of for years. Exactly 1 year after Chloe's wedding, Ben proposed to me in that very Golden Valley restaurant, decorating that unfortunate table 12 with candles and flowers. On the chair lay a sign, "Table for the Happy." When he knelt on one knee, I already knew the answer before he even asked the question. Chloe's reaction to our engagement was exactly what I had secretly dreamed of. The sister who had spent years trying to convince me I wasn't good enough now watched as I prepared to marry a man who truly loved me. But you know what? The real revenge wasn't in that at all. Not in proving to Chloe that I was worthy of love. Not in showing off the right man. The real revenge was in realizing that her approval no longer mattered to me. Not at all. Ben's respect showed me what I truly deserved, and I would never settle for less again. Our wedding was much more modest than Chloe's, but 100 times happier. We gathered our closest loved ones in a small restaurant overlooking the Vltava River. Instead of humiliating anyone, we simply celebrated each other. Chloe herself insisted on being my bridesmaid. During her toast, she spoke beautiful words about how happy she was to see me in love, that Ben was a perfect match, that she had always known I would one day meet the one. Her rewritten version of events sounded almost comical to those who had attended both weddings. But I didn't care. I now had a person who had seen my true worth from the very beginning. Now, looking back, I realize Chloe's wedding was both the worst night of my life and the best turning point. Her cruelty made me understand how long I had allowed people to treat me wrongly, how silently I had endured her sarcastic remarks at family dinners, how I had believed that being 32 without a marriage certificate was almost a life sentence. But it was precisely because of that evening, because of the humiliation she orchestrated, that I met Ben. Without her attempts to portray me as a pathetic loser, I might never have allowed myself to accept help from a stranger. I would have politely refused, gone home, and cried into my pillow all night. But at that moment, I was so exhausted by the taunts that when Ben extended a helping hand, I took it, and it changed everything. Sometimes, the very people who hurt us inadvertently push us towards changes that alter our destiny forever. Chloe wanted me to feel pathetic and lonely. Instead, she created the circumstances under which I met the love of my life. The irony of fate, isn't it? By trying to prove I was unwanted, she simply led me straight to the man who made me truly happy. And you know what the funniest thing is? A year and a half after our wedding, I accidentally overheard Chloe talking to Mum. "Mum, why does everything work out so well for Anna?" Chloe said with resentment. "I put so much effort into my wedding, and everyone only talks about Anna's romantic story with Ben, how they met at my wedding. She even turned my wedding into her own success story." I quietly closed the door and left. Not because it hurt, no, but because I felt sorry for Chloe. She never understood that happiness isn't a competition. Love isn't measured by the size of a husband's bank account or the lavishness of a wedding. True victory isn't about being better than someone else, but about being happy yourself. 2.5 years later, Chloe and Alex divorced. When she called me, crying, I didn't hesitate, I went to her. I didn't say, "I told you so," nor did I bring up that awful evening. I simply hugged my crying sister and stayed by her side. Because revenge is a temporary feeling that warms the soul while you're unhappy. When you're truly happy, revenge simply isn't needed. It disappears like morning mist. Chloe and I didn't become best friends. Too many scars. But we learned to respect each other. We learned not to compete, but simply to be sisters. She still sometimes makes stinging remarks, it's part of her character. But now those words don't wound me, because I know my worth. And I don't need that worth confirmed by a ring on my finger, or my husband's status, or anyone else's approval. Ben and I live between Prague and London. My agency has grown to 15 employees. His company has opened offices in 3 countries. But most importantly, we still dance in the kitchen to old songs, laugh at silly jokes, and thank each other for the little things every day. He still remembers that wedding in detail. Sometimes in the evening, he says, "You know, I saw you even before I approached. You were sitting at that table, so beautiful, trying to smile even though your eyes were full of pain." I decided to get to know the girl who seemed the most interesting at that entire celebration. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if that wedding had gone differently. If Chloe hadn't staged that public humiliation, would I have met Ben? I don't know, and I don't want to know, because our story, with all its pain and incredible twists, is perfect exactly as it is. It taught me that dignity isn't something other people give you, it's something you carry within yourself, no matter what. That love doesn't come when you desperately search for it, conforming to others' expectations. It comes when you remain true to yourself, even if you're judged, even if you're sitting at the table of losers. And that the best revenge isn't showing your tormentor their mistake. The best revenge is living so happily that their opinion becomes completely irrelevant. Chloe wanted to break me that evening, but instead, she gave me the greatest gift, the opportunity to meet the man who saw in me everything I didn't see in myself. So thank you, Chloe, for that terrible evening. Without it, this beautiful life wouldn't exist. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that dignity cannot be taken away, it can only be given to yourself, click the super thanks button. That little heart with a $sign under the video. Every time you do, you help us create stories that inspire and remind people that true happiness isn't measured by external standards. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. Write in the comments which moment touched you the most. Was there a person in your life who helped you see your own worth? Subscribe and turn on the bell to not miss new stories about how life can bring unexpected turns. Like if you believe that true love comes not when we desperately search for it, but when we remain true to ourselves. And before you go, watch the story we've left here on the screen. We are sure it will also make you reflect on what is truly important in life.